On behalf of Met Institute of Mass Media, with immense pleasure, I would like to introduce you to Aditi Anand, Head Creative Strategy for brand Coca-Cola, India and Southwest Asia. Aditi is an award-winning marketer with 15 years of experience across telecom, e-commerce, consumer durables, and FMCG. She has led teams across multiple marketing sub-functions like brand strategy and media, digital and social media marketing, content marketing, consumer insights, retail, and e-commerce. She is an alumnus of IMT Ghaziabad, from where she completed her PGD BM with specialization in marketing and IT, and then completed her accelerated development program in management and strategy from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She started her career with Airtel and developed and executed brand, media, and digital strategy for Airtel Digital TV. From there, she moved into devising brand strategy for voice, value added services, broadband, 4G, and device partnerships for Airtel. After spending almost 7 years at Airtel, Aditi moved to Flipkart, where she was the marketing lead for two categories, namely lifestyle and home. From Flipkart, Aditi moved to Micromax, where she held a leadership position as head of marketing for U Mobiles, which was an online smartphone brand by Micromax. During her stint, she worked directly with the co founders to define the brand positioning and developed a robust go to market strategy. From U Mobiles, Aditi moved to HMD Global as head of brand, media, and digital marketing for Nokia Mobiles in India. After spending almost 4.5 years at Nokia, Aditi moved to Coca Cola as head of creative strategy. Aditi loves numbers and ideas and has been associated with several B schools as mentor. And last but not the least, she is working on publishing her very first book. It's truly an honor to have you with us, ma'am, today.
Thank you. Thanks, Chetan, for a very generous introduction. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, ma'am. All right. Allow me to open today's discussion by putting across a very pertinent question, ma'am. In wake of the current situation, which is unprecedented, of course, and the first of its kind which each one of us is encountering, how has the scope of brand management evolved, especially in wake of the current pandemic? And how are brands recalibrating their communication strategies in a bid to make themselves more meaningful, differentiated, and salient to build or drive equity? I would request you to please throw some light on that.
Sure. So I'll try and answer the question from a brand management lens, though a lot has changed since the pandemic. Where the business is actually evolving and developing newer business models. But you asked this question with respect to brand marketing, so I'll try and answer with respect to that. One is that the pandemic, with all the pandemic, the loss of livelihood, the loss of lives, there was all this fear, and there were also these restrictions, and people couldn't sort of go out. That actually led businesses to sort of change their business models, because businesses realized that people are now expecting things and products and brands to reach them versus them going out and reaching out to brands and products. So there was an increased focus on digitization, and that happened at the business side because consumers were expecting businesses to be agile and to reach them where they were versus them going out and meeting the brands and the businesses. And as businesses moved to the digital space, brand marketing also moved to the digital space. So while the contribution of digital was as a media channel has been increasing steadily over the years, I think the last 2 to 3 years have actually accelerated the pace. And when I say digitization, I just don't mean digital media spends. I mean even the experiences that you give consumers on a digital medium, or the communities that you create, or the way you talk to people. So I think one is that businesses have moved online or are trying. Even the traditional categories are now figuring out a D2C and an e-commerce strategy. So brand marketing needs to have an increased focus on digital. So that's the first. The second, I would say that traditionally categories or products and brands that used to get consumed out of home have now started to get consumed inside their home. So at home consumption is increasing. And a lot of these impulse categories like chocolates, soft drinks, chips, where you actually used to walk into your grocery store, see a chocolate, just pick it up out of impulse. Those use cases have sort of gone away. And therefore, you see, I don't know if you guys have seen the very latest Cadbury's campaign where they're trying to say, stock up your refrigerator. It's actually based on that insight. You want people to stock up the product at home because at home consumption is the new trend, which is going to stay for a couple of years at least. That's emerged. And I think the third thing that has emerged and brand marketing has changed to sort of be cognizant of this new trend is trust. So there was this whole phase where the incidence and consumption of wellness and nutrition led products increased. And then there was also this suspicion because when the money that you have at hand goes down, then you do, from a consumer lens, you do want to invest in brands that you trust. So from a brand marketer perspective, making your brand come across as a trusted brand was very important. So one very interesting trend that actually emerged when COVID happened and businesses started going down into the red, a lot of brands actually stopped spends on advertising because
right.
It's a clear balance sheet, right? So if you're not making money, how do you continue to pump money into marketing?
Correct.
But stronger brands, the brands that are strong, actually increased their advertising spends. And they increased their advertising spends because they realize that what is the mind frame in which the consumer is at. He or she is looking for trusted options, and he's feeling vulnerable, he or she is feeling vulnerable. So that's not the time to go away from his mind frame, but that's actually the time to reinforce the trust in your brand. So I think for brand marketers, to sum it up, three broad ways in which it's evolved. One, increased focus on digital, with businesses moving to digital side of things, fulfillment happening on digital, selection happening on digital, discoverability happening on digital. Brand marketing has to evolve to be digital first. Second, build occasions for at-home consumption. Tell people why they need to stock your product at home and how they can have a good time at home with your brand. And third, increased focus on trust. I think those are three broad themes that are true for most categories and businesses because of the pandemic.
Great. That's a very comprehensive perspective which you've given, ma'am, and I so relate to it because during my stint at Parley Products, in fact, we were among the first ones to get our product lines rolling and ensuring that pantry stocking happens in a bit to drive household consumption, right? Which did drive our top line as well. So it's very relatable and definitely something which brands did at a very large scale. You spoke about the focus on D2C as a category. Today, we have seen multiple brands who have made use of this particular platform in a bid to drive penetration and accessibility, right? However, this category as such is very cluttered. Let's take the example of Beardo as a brand, which has brought about a paradigm shift in male grooming. 50% of the brand's business comes from tier 2 and tier 3 cities. However, it's just not Beardo, but other players as well, whether it's the Bombay Shaving Company, Man Company, right? So the category is getting really very cluttered. If you look at Oziva, Nykaa, and there are multiple examples. In such a scenario, how do brands go about creating a point of difference or essentially a blue ocean for themselves?
Okay. So my first brush with e-commerce actually happened back in 2014 when I joined Flipkart. And being the market leader, we were trying to understand at that point in time, the penetration of e-commerce in the country was fairly nascent. So there the task was, how do you get more and more people to shop online? Because there are various reasons for different categories why people love to shop offline, whether it's essential purchases, whether it is discretionary purchases. So we were trying to understand what will get, or what are the category drivers. Now I'm using a marketing term. What are the category drivers that will pull people from offline to online? And I think 7-8 years down the line, I think those three category drivers still hold. So what we figured out, and it was based on a very large consumer study across tier 1, tier 2, men, women, urban, rural, different age groups, etc., because we were trying to grow and develop the market. So it was a fairly large consumer research that we did, quantitative in nature. And what we realized at the end of that research was that basically, irrespective of what you do, there are three broad reasons why someone would shop online in the near and the medium and the long term versus shopping offline. The first is availability and selection. So, a physical store, no matter how big it is, will only be able to stock those many products, lines, sizes, patterns, colors, etc., right? Because it's still limited by physical space. A cloud store or an offline or an online store is not limited by space. So selection, and it's true for some categories like apparel, etc., where selection is more important. For some other categories it's less important. It depends, but selection, availability, choice is one very big driver for e-commerce, which is an advantage over a physical store. The second is pricing. So people are looking, and this was more based on also understanding and looking at the China market and the markets in the West, that price plays a very important role. So people are looking at discounts, deals, offers, general consumer behavior, sale, etc., to really stock up products. So pricing is the second advantage. And the third advantage is really convenience or service. So how can you give them convenience? How can you give them service? And you pull back and you see any e-commerce player or a D2C brand, you will understand that they have built their proposition and trying to build their differentiation on either one of the three pillars. So if you look at Zepto or if you look at Blinkist, which is so much in the market, a 10-minute proposition is a convenience or a service proposition. If you look at Big Billion Day or Freedom Sale or Amazon Sale, they're all built on pricing as the one. And even if you look at a Myntra or a Nykaa, they're all trying to say selection, lots of products, lots of lines, etc. So that's those are the three spaces, irrespective of which D2C brand, irrespective of which company, it will be a combination of these. And frankly, to create differentiation, because there are only so many propositions, consumers are also looking at actual experience. So gone are the days when you could do point of view advertising and get done with it. Now people are looking at experience. So when I order a product from Amazon, how quickly do I get it? Can I return it? Is it a hassle-free return? Is it at the right price? Do I get the right selection? So one part of it is to talk about and create those propositions. The other is actually to fulfill those propositions by giving spectacular consumer experience. So I think that's what brands are trying to do, trying to figure out a blue ocean strategy in one of these areas. But the larger part, or the tougher or the trickier part, is actually then fulfillment of that promise.
Absolutely.
Which is tough.
Absolutely. All right. Now, steering the conversation to a different direction altogether, I remember, ma'am, I guess this was somewhere in 2011. I was in my first year. And for the very first time, I came across Airtel's Hurric Friend Zaruri Hota Hai campaign. And I remember that the moment I used to step into my college, and each one of us used to just hum into the tune of it because it was so catchy, right? Now, considering this particular campaign, which created a different positioning for Airtel, what was the thought process? What was the problem statement? And rather, what was the need to rebrand? If you could once again please throw some light on that.
Absolutely. So I think one point that I want to reinforce is that all the very exciting stuff that we see on brand management or communication, advertising side of things, they're all rooted in solving a business problem.
Sure.
Otherwise, they become frivolous. For Airtel, at that point in time, Airtel was the market leader. Unlike now when Jio has slightly taken over, Jio was not even there. But Airtel was the market leader, but also in neck-to-neck competition with Idea as well as Vodafone. So these were the three big players, so as to say. And then you had a lot of other players coming in like Uninor, etc., which we didn't really bother much about. But what we saw in 2011, and it was also looking at a lot of our own consumer data, looking at where the brand is going, etc. But what we actually realized is that a lot of 18-year-olds, even 25-year-olds, looked at Airtel as a leader brand that one day I will own because I would have reached that stature. So Airtel was considered, it was a market leader, it was perceived to be a market leader, but something that a consumer wants to grow up to own versus owning it now.
Right.
That was also the time when mobile internet was just about coming into India. And when you look at your business and the state of the industry, and it was largely based and surviving on voice, but data was clearly the next, the next phase of mobile telephony. And the way a business was going to be built for the future was to get people to embrace mobile internet. So that's a technology business, and telecom is a consumer technology business. It's always about looking into the future and trying to bring those future trends, because you know that that's how the market is going to shift. You've got enough learnings to understand that's what's happening in the Western countries, that's what's happening in China. So it's bound to happen. Now, the problem with technology is that the youth are the first adopters of technology. Look at any consumer technology product, use it. Look at Facebook, look at WhatsApp, look at mobile data, look at OTT consumption, anything at all. Always youth will be the first ones to enter a category, take it from niche to mainstream, and then the late adopters and the older folks keep coming. So if the business and the mobile telephony landscape was bound to change from voice to data, for which you wanted 18-year-olds to come into the fold now and not rely on 25, 30-year-old, but 18-year-olds are saying that you are a brand I will own when I have reached somewhere in life. They're not owning you today. So how do you make your brand relevant for an 18-year-old today, not something that they want to own in the future? So that was problem statement number one. The second statement was, not only was getting youth important for the future, but if you look at a telecom business works on the fundamentals of customer lifetime value, because it's a service
Yeah.
business, right? Month on month, you pay them, whether you are on prepaid or you are on postpaid. You acquire a customer once, even if you're spending 100 rupees, 200 rupees to acquire a customer, that customer will typically stay with you for a couple of years. And the customer life cycle value is therefore monetized over a couple of years. So if you get in customers early, then you retain them for that much longer, and therefore you're building a very solid, robust business. So how do we get consumers, youth, 18-year-olds into the fold today, to not only be to have them with us for a longer time, but also when the landscape changes to mobile data, you need to have consumers who are technology first, and that's youth. So that is where the business challenge was. What the consumer was telling us was, you are absolutely a brand I want, but you are a leader brand that I will grow up and own one day. So the whole rebranding exercise was to tell consumers that Airtel should be a brand for today, not for 5 years later, because a lot of people like you, your entire network is actually on Airtel. And from there, it once the business problem and the strategy space is identified, then you deep dive and say, okay, so what is that insight which is relevant for an 18-year-old that I will have to say about my brand so that it resonates with them.
Correct.
And when you look at 18-year-olds, for an 18-year-old, his friends are his family. His network is his friends. The most important relationship for an 18-year-old is his or her set of friends. And therefore was born the whole insight of hurric friend zaruri hota hai, and really literally telling the consumers, hey, we understand your life, we understand your lingo, we understand what's important. And you know what? Your entire network is actually on Airtel because we are the market leader. So don't wait to grow up, because all your friends are already on Airtel, and this is the youth belly. It's not a brand to postpone for 5 years later, 7 years later, but you need to come on to and latch on to it today. It's that cool brand that you need to get on today. So that was the business problem, that was the consumer insight, and therefore was born the whole campaign of Har Ek Friend Zaruri Hota Hai.
Right, and this is really relatable. And today, when I discuss case studies with my students, this is something which we talk about often. But ma'am, this was 2011. Let's come to 2022, right? If we look at the telecom sector, which is really very profitable in terms of average revenue per user, currently Jio is dominating this particular segment, right? Uh, What is the biggest problem statement or issue with Airtel currently? And if given a situation to bounce back and regain market share, how can that happen?
Okay, so Airtel was a market leader, is now number two. So uh, Vodafone is the one which is like really, even after they had the merger with Idea, they're like really not in a good space. But uh, Airtel continues to be the second leader. So I don't think that they've sort of not doing well. Yes, they're not number one. They are more so like a challenger brand. But if you actually dig deeper into the average revenue per user, into the net active consumers, into the profitability metrics, which we call unit economics in e-commerce, you'll actually see that they have a more profitable and sound business. Yes, they don't have the largest customer market share and the largest revenue market share, but they still own one third. That's one side of the thing. I think the other part of it, I'll go back to what I started saying, that gone is the era where you could do fancy advertising, tell really nice stories, and the job is done. Consumers today are actually looking at experiencing what you told them, the promise that you set out in the advertising. Now they are actually looking at experiencing it. So if the network doesn't come, or if the data speeds are not high, or if the pricing is off the charts, I mean, consumers will move away. So it's one is to make a promise through advertising, the second is to live the promise.
Right.
I think that's what consumers are looking at, irrespective of categories right now. Telecom business is a very capital expenditure intensive business. You need to buy the
Spectrum.
network, the spectrum. You need to put physical infrastructure, towers, capex. So it's a the advantages that you build are not short term imitable. They are very long term, because you to put that infrastructure, it takes time, it takes money, it takes strategic investment, etc. But once you build a very solid business, then that advantage stays with you for a couple of years till somebody else sort of comes in. So I think that's what they are trying to do. They've got a recent funding from Google now, so
That's true.
hopefully that's going to bump up the money that they have, the free cash that they have to set up a lot more infrastructure. But it's moved away from telling great stories to actually now living that promise that you're making through advertising.
Right. Now, moving on from Airtel to another brand, which probably you spearheaded while championing its repositioning, which is Nokia, right? Way back in 2005 and 2006, each one of us, I used a Nokia. Nokia was my first smartphone, which was given to me, right? However, we all are well versed with the fact that Samsung came and toppled it completely. How did you go about repositioning the brand Nokia so that in 2019, as a result of which it became the second most trusted brand in the category?
So on Nokia, again, that's very typical of consumer technology brands. There is a brand aspect of things, and then there is the actual product delivery. Again, coming back to what I was saying in
Sure.
context to Airtel. Also, on Nokia, the challenge was the brand never lost its sheen, its appeal. You just said it was my first brand. Whenever you say Nokia, there will absolutely be nobody in India who would say, I don't know what Nokia is, or I have not used a Nokia, or I don't have a story about Nokia. So the problem was not at the brand side, the problem was at the product side. So it was a powerhouse of a brand riding a very failed product. And for consumer technology, the product needs to live up, because it's not a promise like a chips or a chocolate, right? Where the expectation is not that high. It's more subjective. This is based on a little more rational actual benefits. For Nokia, the product was not built for the current times the way it was evolving. The brand had its power and its sheen, but the product failed the brand, which is why they sort of exited the market. They sold off the business to Microsoft, and they just like completely shut down the business. And then they realized that okay, the again, consumer technology comes in waves, and there are waves of innovation where a technology comes, becomes mainstream, another technology comes, becomes mainstream, so on and so forth. Android and Google operating system, which is an open source operating system built for mobile, was the future, while they were still stuck to Windows, which was a desktop operating system, which is why the experience on the product was extremely bad, etc., etc. So the first thing that we did when we relaunched was to fix the product experience, because I mean, you can keep telling as many fancy stories as you want, but if the product doesn't deliver, then the brand only goes that far. So the new brand that was launched, the smartphones, they came on Android operating system, so gave the same experience that you would have with the Samsung and many other Android phones that you have. The second was then to actually talk about the brand in a way where it kindles nostalgia, and everybody stands up and says, yeah, hey, that's a brand that I used when I was growing up. I saw my father using, you know what, it's back. So how do you get that latent brand equity back into active brand equity? And that was the role of brand marketing. So we went about reminding people what Nokia was, the positive experience they had with Nokia, but also what the Nokia of today and future will be. Because when we spoke about Nokia, there was this a lot of positive stories and narratives that consumers played back at us, but there was also the disappointment of the product that came in, because I mean there is a reason why the brand didn't do well and the business had to be shut, and that was because the product failed. So there was
Right.
good and then there was bad. So the unique challenge that we had was, how can you keep the good and dial down the bad? So supplement the good that the brand stands for with what's new, what's upcoming in the brand, and tell a consumer story that once people, the challenge was, how do you generate trials? Because
Correct.
how do you get somebody to pick up a Nokia and experience a Nokia and realize that it's not the same Nokia with which you had probably not a very optimal experience in the past?
Right.
And the whole challenge was, use a powerhouse of the brand, talk about the positive stuff, and generate trials. And once people actually experience the product, trust was a lot based on what the brand promise was, but was also based on what the product experience was. So we fixed the product experience, we reminded people of the brand experience, and then that was the story that we weaved for Nokia.
Great. Ma'am, throughout the course of this wonderful conversation which we've been having, we have given immense importance to consumer insights, because consumer insights eventually become the bedrock for you to put down any strategy, right? As per you, and considering the years of experience which you've acquired across categories, how consumer insights can be translated into actionable and result oriented strategies to address a problem statement and need gap?
Yeah.
Because for budding marketeers like us, I'm also still a learner. For all of us, this is the most important aspect. What is the process, and how can one excel in this field?
It's a very interesting question. And unearthing an insight is perhaps slightly easy, because you go to consumers, you observe behavior, and you'll get like a ton of insights. I think the tough part is to see which is that insight which you can latch on to, and the way to figure that out is to really put that insight into a triangle. On one point of the triangle is that insight or is that need gap something that my brand can deliver on better than everybody else? So that's the first thing. Second is there someone else that's already delivering on that insight, and therefore maybe I will do this better, but I will still come across as me too. So a lot of brands that actually come from insights based on pricing do come across as me too brands, because at the end of the day someone else is also doing it. So Is it something that I can own? Is it something that I can, that nobody's talking about or my competition has not been able to own? And three, how much do the consumers care about it? So brand, competition, consumer, that's the triangle you put it in. And if it ticks all the three boxes, then you know that this is some insight on which you can deliver on. You can deliver on it better than the competition, or the competition is not talking about it. Maybe they have it, but they've not exploited it. And see, the consumer really cares for it. So that's how you get a couple of strategy spaces from millions of insights that you can unearth through behavioral mapping, through consumer research, etc., data mining. Once you get strategy spaces, to take it to the next step, maybe you're developing products on it, which is the easier or the tough part. But then to convert that into a story or a narrative that somebody would latch on to, it's the creative exercise starts there. And you could have multiple strategy spaces or insights, and some will lend themselves to a very clear core creative idea, and some of them will not. So insights or spaces that can, or that can give you ideas which are winners, are the ones that then you put your bet on. And the whole process is through a lot of hypothesis building, as well as constant validation with consumers, because that's when your confidence sort of builds up. A lot of times, especially in consumer technology industries, consumers don't know what they want, because they cannot imagine technology the way you can imagine technology, because you're the manufacturer, they are the user. So sometimes you got to take a punt, and that's true when you're developing new products. But when you're developing communication ideas based on insights, I think a lot of consumer testing helps. But there's also a role of gut. And here, when I say gut, I just don't mean random guessing. I mean more like fast thinking, slow thinking book framework, where because you've done something so much, you've listened to consumers so much, that your marketer's gut is telling you that that's something that will fire. So I think it's a combination of both, but that's like a rough framework to follow.
Right. Thank you, Vaima. Just one last question before I yield the floor to all our students out here. Many a time, what happens is we as marketeers, what we see in front of us is nothing but a consumer observation. However, we consider it to be an insight. There, and as we all know, there's a process to pull out the insight where you have to ladder it by constantly asking why to arrive at the tension. Right? How do you go about differentiating between an observation and insight?
Um, I think again, some of it you covered by saying that you keep laddering it to see if it's a real tension or not. The other is that I think the most powerful insights are those which are human insights and are universally true. So it should be true in Agra, and it should be true in Coimbatore. It should be true in Delhi, and it should be true in London. Because if it's a human insight, then it needs to be, it will be agnostic of category, consumer, geography, true across. Um, I think that's something that comes with practice. It comes with rigor. It comes with brainstorming. There is no set formula to arrive at it. But
Right.
I think the more you listen to consumers, the more you look at data, and the more you sort of deep dive into it, you do arrive at, and sometimes you don't also, but mostly you do arrive at winning human
Right.
insights.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am, for addressing that. Guys, any questions? Is there anything which you would want to ask? Please feel free. Annette, I guess you have a question. Yeah, feel free. Go ahead.
Um, Hi, ma'am. My question is regarding to the Airtel case study that you were explaining to us. You said that youth, when they started, knowing about this brand, it was an aspirational brand for them. So, do you think Airtel took a risk with bringing the aspiration to the current, user and telling them that this is now? So you use the product now, and you lose the aspirational value of Airtel then? Was it a risk that Airtel chose to take, or
I wouldn't call it that. It happens when you lower down aspiration by bringing the pricing down. So a lot of the times, for example, let's take another example. Let's take the example of iPhone. iPhone is being hugely successful in India today. They are growing year on year, and they are trying to put in a lot of affordability options to get youth to get the brand, because the barrier with iPhone is pricing. But you wouldn't call it a cheap brand. You wouldn't say that they've lost their sheen, right? So
Right.
you can always make the brand relevant to youth by looking at what's the barrier, why they're not coming, without really discounting the brand. Uh, it should not be based on pricing, and you don't need to communicate cheap, even if pricing is the barrier. And classic example is OnePlus, classic example is iPhone. You can still retain the appeal, and the aspiration, while getting youth in, and therefore dissolving the barriers that are keeping them away. So I wouldn't call it a risk. I think it was very, very well thought through.
All
okay,
right.
thank you.
Keith, please go ahead.
Hi, ma'am. I'm Keith. So, my question is, what do you think really happened with HTC? Considering I was really young at the time and they were booming up a lot. As you said, with Nokia, the issue was the problem was on the product end, not the brand's end. And considering Nokia didn't have Android at the time, but HTC did, and their phone models also were really good. What do you think happened with that, and why couldn't they, come back up?
I think building a brand is not a short-term thing. So brand building typically takes years to build brands. Um, One is that they could not really build a very powerful brand. So while a couple of their models were good, but it's not that they really could differentiate and stand for something. So if you ask me today, what did HTC stand for? I don't have an answer. I can tell you what Samsung stands for, what Nokia stood for, the good and the bad, but they're differentiated. HTC had no personality. If I had to describe HTC, or if anybody had to describe HTC, people would struggle to describe it in 2 or 3 sentences. So I think a lot of lackluster brand building. They did come up with a couple of good products, but they really couldn't build a brand. And HTC actually coincided with Nokia, Samsung, Micromax, Intex. All of these guys were sort of coming up. I think they just kind of didn't get the pulse of the Indian consumer, and that's why they came, maybe a couple of good products, and then they went out of the market.
Yeah, so I was in junior college at the time and my 10th. So I just remember, like, whenever I think of HTC, I just remember they came for a short time, had a good time, and then just left. Like, they vanished. That is the perception I have. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Just one last question. Karan, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, ma'am. So my question is wonderful insights on the lecture today, but I just have one question, ma'am. If you're in a red ocean category, besides innovation, how do you keep driving meaningful differentiation and salience? How do you keep driving that besides innovating your own product?
That's a good question, actually. And when you talk about red ocean, I think mobile phones is a classic red ocean category today, because you have so much competition, etc., etc. Innovation is important, but what you can also look at is service differentiation. So even if you look, I say it a lot, but if you look at the mobile phone market today, there are two brands. One is iOS and one is Android. Every Android product is more or less giving you the same experience. And then there is iOS. So that's product innovation. But the reason why so many Android brands, from a Samsung to an iPhone to a OnePlus, etc., even Micromax, etc., at some point in time came and went, is because you can always build a service proposition over and above innovation. But what we've seen from a lot of data, a lot of insights, and a lot of consumer research is that innovation is actually, for any product, consumer technology product or any technology product, innovation is actually the most important, followed by service differentiation. When I say service differentiation, it could be an experience, it could be convenience, it could be certain features that make it brilliant, like how Amazon etc are trying to build voice, they're trying to build chatbots. Those are all service experiences. So innovation and service experience, I would say, um, can give long-term sustainable advantage, which is better than advertising and just burning media mines.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you once again. All right. It's truly been a privilege, ma'am, having this wonderful conversation with you. I would request Anna to please give the word of thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out time from your schedule on a Saturday morning to speak to this bunch of us. I'm sure each of us are taking some learning that we will definitely use when we step into the industry. And we hope that you had a good time conversing with us today. And we hope to see you soon, ma'am, sometime.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
All the best.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you.